Welcome to our channel today. We're diving deep into the experience of being captured by one of the most feared Native American tribes, the Apache. Our story revolves around Herman Lehmann, whose life took a dramatic turn after he was captured at the tender age of 11 in 1870. Over the course of 9 intense years, he would find himself immersed in a world far removed from his own, learning to survive among the Apache. I research historical events that intrigue me, and I aim to share them in a way that feels like a conversation with friends. If that resonates with you, be sure to subscribe, like, and share the video. It helps grow our community and supports my work. In May of 1870, Herman's mother sent him and his siblings, Willie and Carolyn, out to the family's wheat field to scare off birds. After a job well done, the kids took a moment to relax and play, not realizing the imminent danger. Before they knew it, they were surrounded. Herman would later recall the horror of the moment, saying, "When we saw their hideous painted faces, we were terribly frightened, and some of us pulled for the house. But it was too late. Willie was captured right where he sat, while Carolyn sprinted toward the house. The Apache fired shots at her as she fled, and she fell, giving the appearance of being mortally wounded. Meanwhile, Herman tried to run, but was swiftly overtaken by the Apache chief, Carnivized, who held him down and fiercely wrestled with him. The young boy was slapped, choked, and had his clothes torn off in a brutal encounter. Believing this might be the end, the Apache stripped Herman and Willie of their clothes and threw them onto horses, exposing them to the harsh sun and cutting winds as they raced through briars and thorny brush. Herman later wrote, "Death just then would have been a relief to me." The 1870s were a dangerous time on the western frontier. Apache and Comanche tribes still roamed freely, and encounters like these were an unfortunate reality for settlers. Much of what we know about Herman's story comes from his book 9 Years Among the Indians, in which he detailed his struggle and survival. Decades later, shortly after their capture, the Apache painted and dressed the two boys in Apache attire, then separated them. Willie's group ran into a party of Texas Rangers, and while the Rangers gave chase, Willie's horse began to weaken. The Apache, in a desperate attempt to escape, threw Willie off to lighten their load. Whether the Rangers mistook him for an Apache child or simply missed him altogether, Willie was left to fend for himself. At just 8 or 9 years old, he eventually made his way back to civilization. However, Herman's fate was far less fortunate. Forced to consume raw meat, which initially made him ill, Herman faced regular beatings from Carnivized, who grew frustrated with the boy's frequent vomiting. To deter any escape attempts, the Apache claimed his family had been killed during the raid, tying him to stakes each night, with a heavy stone on his back to prevent movement. For weeks they journeyed through unforgiving landscapes, often going days without food. Herman gradually grew accustomed to raw meat, and the Apache's treatment of him softened, until they reached the main village. In a haunting initiation, Herman was forcibly held down, as his ears were pierced with hot iron. His hair was cut, and he was mercilessly beaten until he lost consciousness. Upon waking, Herman found himself clean-oiled and brought before a communal feast. Placed in front of an array of roasted and raw meats, he sensed his next actions would be crucial. Reflecting later, he wrote, "Either on account of my extreme hunger or divine providence, I seized the raw meat and began to eat." This gesture pleased the Apache, and they welcomed him with cheers, giving him the Apache name Enda, meaning white boy. Herman soon became a servant to Carnivized, fetching water, preparing his pipe, and assisting with daily chores. He was also tasked with wrestling Apache boys, earning a level of respect for his scrappy fighting spirit over time. The Apache integrated Herman into their way of life, and he began to learn survival skills. He was taught how to craft bows and arrows and to make a buffalo hide shield. As he gained confidence and familiarity, they started bringing him along on raids. Initially, he was just bait or a distraction. But over time, he proved his worth and earned a degree of respect among the warriors. At one point during a raid, Herman and a group of Apache encountered for Mexican buffalo hunters. In the chaos that followed, Herman, left to guard a Mexican captive, found himself attacked with stones. He instinctively drew his bow and wounded the man in self-defense, leading to his first kill. when ordered by Carnivus to finish him. Though Herman was still just a child, the Apache saw this act as a rite of passage, fully accepting him as one of their own. As Herman's life became more intertwined with the Apache, the larger world around them was changing rapidly. The 1870s marked the peak of the Indian Wars, with the U.S. government relentlessly expanding westward. Apache communities were increasingly pressured to move to reservations, sometimes going voluntarily to avoid violence. This new confinement led to rising tensions, not only with American forces, but also with rival tribes, including the Comanche. In attempts to resolve these disputes, gambling matches and competitions often took place, with Herman participating in horse races and wrestling matches with Comanche boys. In a twist of fate unknown to Herman, his family had not been killed, his sister had only feigned death, and his mother had never ceased searching for him, visiting every fort and settlement, asking about a young white boy living among the Apache. After 3 transformative years with the Apache, Herman had fully adopted their ways. The boy who had once yearned for freedom had become one of them now, bearing a profound fear and disdain for white settlers. His memories of his former life, language, and even his given name had faded. Opportunities to escape had come and gone, but he chose to stay, determined to prove his worth to the tribe that had reshaped his entire being. A skirmish with Texas Rangers, however, would present him with a chance to distinguish himself. At 14, Herman found himself in a vulnerable position during a sudden attack while with a small Apache party. Texas Rangers ambushed them, forcing Herman and others to flee. His escape was thwarted when his horse was shot and collapsed, pinning him beneath it. His Apache comrades, seeing he was trapped, took his bow and left him behind. Fearing for his life, Herman awaited the Rangers' approach. To his surprise, they noticed his pale skin and recognized he was white. Thinking they had the advantage, the Rangers agreed to pursue the other Apaches first, leaving Herman under the horse. But when they returned, Herman was gone, vanished. Years later, Thomas Gillespie, one of the Rangers, recounted the incident in a magazine, describing how Herman seemingly disappeared without a trace. It was a testament to Herman's remarkable adaptability. Through Apache teachings, he had acquired the art of stealth, mastering the uncanny ability to vanish. After dragging himself from under the horse, he crawled through the brush and found refuge in a nearby depression in the land. Blending in with grass, he waited for the Rangers to give up their search. Left without supplies or a horse, Herman then embarked on a daunting 300-mile journey to reunite with his tribe, a feat remarkable for someone so young. His eventual return stunned the tribe. They had believed he was dead, buried by his comrades' deceitful claims. To his surprise, Carnivale, the Apache chief, saw Herman's return as a testament to his loyalty and recognition. He appointed Herman as a petty chief, a significant honor, but Herman's new-found role came just as the Apache lands faced an unprecedented wave of encroachment by white settlers as American military presence swelled. The Apache were driven from their territories, forcing them into increasingly barren lands. One promising territory held ample water and game, but it also contained traces of a peculiar yellow metal. Gold Carnivores foresaw that this discovery would draw the relentless interest of white miners, and he ordered the group to move on. Eventually, the Apache were forced to relocate to Fort Sill Reservation. Ironically, it was the famous Comanche leader, Quanah Parker, who convinced them to surrender to American forces. But the reservation life was bitterly confining, and before long the Apache made a daring escape, leaving the reservation under the cover of night. They traveled west, eluding soldiers for about 100 miles, but they soon faced the same old challenges: limited resources and the harsh landscape. Survival was a constant struggle, and Herman's tribe, faced with starvation and exposure, ultimately decided to return to Fort Sill, a move that would lead them into a world of internal conflicts and newfound dangers. Life on the reservation was turbulent. One challenge was alcohol, which was easily accessible, but devastating to the tribe's cohesion. The Apache bands, though culturally and linguistically similar, were not monolithic. Rivalries between them were frequent, especially with one particular group. Tensions flared regularly, but a particularly violent altercation occurred after a drunken celebration, or carouse as Herman called it. One Apache man was seriously wounded, prompting Herman's group to retaliate by raiding the rival band's supplies. The resulting brawl was only broken up by soldiers, but authorities now involved were set to dole out punishment. Herman's group, intent on avoiding further conflict, considered fleeing again, however. A final shipment of whiskey prompted them to stay one last night, a choice that led to chaos. Fueled by liquor, the camp descended into madness. Even women were drawn into brutal fights over accusations of infidelity, and tragically some lost their lives. In a rage, Herman's group launched an attack on their rivals before packing their belongings and heading into the plains. Unfortunately, the rival band soon caught up. After an initial confrontation, the attackers retreated, luring Herman's group into an ambush. Warriors seemed to emerge from the earth itself, and chaos erupted in a hail of spears, tomahawks, and lances during the fray. Carnivs intervened to save Herman from a spear-wielding assailant, but was mortally wounded by a rival medicine man. Alone and outmatched, Herman found himself facing this figure, who had long instilled fear in him. Apache legend held that medicine men possessed supernatural protection, which made them nearly impossible to kill. The medicine man, wielding a Winchester rifle, taunted Herman, declaring it to be his last day. "We will see," Herman responded, hiding behind a large rock as bullets ricocheted around him. After circling the rock several times, Herman found an opening and loosed an arrow, which struck the medicine man beneath his shield. The man fell, pleading for mercy, but Herman, driven by survival and necessity, delivered a second fatal blow. In a somber realization, Herman knew he could no longer stay with the Apache. He would be forever hunted for killing the medicine man. Alone and uncertain, he decided to leave, taking only the most essential supplies and stealing the swiftest horse from the camp. With no other options, Herman fled, riding deep into the wilderness, knowing that both the Apaches and white settlers posed threats to his survival. After days of travel, he found refuge in a secluded canyon, where a small stream and patches of cottonwood trees offered a semblance of safety. Here he lived in solitude for 8 months, reliant solely on his own skills and instincts. But solitude proved unsustainable. One night under the full moon, he was awakened by distant voices. Initially, he dismissed them as figments of his imagination, but soon he heard laughter echoing through the canyon, chilling him to the bone. Venturing out of his shelter, he crept toward the sounds, and by the glow of a campfire, he spotted figures he knew too well. They were Apache members of the rival band, who had come to avenge their fallen medicine man. Realizing the danger, Herman gathered what he could carry and mounted his horse, fleeing northward. He left Apache territory behind, venturing into the range of the Comanche, a land that held its own perils, but might at least offer a new chance at survival. At just 15, Herman was about to undertake a plan that was as audacious as it was desperate, with no real guidance. His hope was to locate a Comanche village, ask to join their tribe, and somehow avoid being killed. The Comanche were notoriously territorial and deadly to strangers, especially those they saw as threats. So the odds were certainly against him. And as if that wasn't enough, he didn't speak the Comanche language. Herman planned to rely on hand gestures and facial expressions, hoping someone might understand what we'd now call North American Sign Language, an ASLA faint hope, to say the least. Despite his vague plan, Herman soon got an eerie sense that he was approaching a Comanche encampment. He couldn't explain why, but something in the atmosphere warned him, and the tension must have been electrifying. And indeed, not long after he spotted their camp, rather than approach in daylight or with any formal greeting, he chose to slip into their camp under the cover of night. As he approached, a group of Comanche warriors seated around a fire, sharing stories and laughter, he found himself struck by their liveliness, a stark contrast to the usually somber Apache camps he'd known. He mustered his courage and stepped into their midst, only to send the entire group of warriors jumping up in shock, emitting war cries and scattering. Herman stood there bewildered until they returned, roaring and ready to fight. Knowing he had to act fast, Herman made signs of peace. One fierce elder woman seemed eager to see him dead, but another Comanche who understood Apache intervened and allowed Herman to explain himself. Herman told the incredible tale of his journey, a white boy raised by Apache, forsaken by them, and now seeking a place among the Comanche. Remarkably, one of the warriors recognized him from past encounters, remembering the time Herman had beaten him in a horse race organized by Carnivesti. The recognition won him a tentative acceptance, and he was allowed to stay. Over the next days, Herman traveled with the Comanche until they reached the main body of the tribe. Here he presented himself before the chief, pledging to take on the role of a Comanche warrior and to defend the tribe as if he'd been born among them. He received a new name, Montekina, a name that would symbolize his rebirth within the Comanche people. For a time, Herman found a place in Comanche society. He took part in raids, fighting both Tonkawa warriors and American soldiers, as he'd once sworn he would. However, the same encroaching forces that had harried the Apache were closing in on the Comanche. Quanah Parker, a respected Comanche leader, wisely recognized the inevitable and advocated for reservation life as a way to avoid starvation and death. The Comanche's way of life was ending, and Parker, seeing no other choice, agreed to move to a reservation. Once there, Herman encountered a surprise he could never have anticipated. He was finally reunited with his white family. The Comanche life had been his own for so long that it seemed impossible anyone from his past world would still remember him. However, his mother had never given up searching. Through sheer persistence, she found herself speaking with General Randolph S. Mackenzie, who happened to know of a white boy at the Comanche reservation. Mackenzie arranged for Herman to visit, though Herman himself was reluctant, believing his family dead. With encouragement from Quanah, who promised he could return to the Comanche if things went awry, Herman agreed to go. Arriving in Loyal Valley, Texas, he found himself surrounded by a crowd of onlookers. Among them was his mother, but Herman didn't recognize her. His old life was so far removed that he could hardly recall anything about it. His brother Willie and sister Mina, however, spotted a scar on his arm from a childhood accident, a wound he hadn't thought about in years. Herman's memories, long buried, came flooding back as he recognized his siblings. He later wrote about this moment, recalling how his childhood memories returned, finally allowing him to accept his white family, though with some reluctance. Transitioning back into a white family wasn't easy. Herman tried repeatedly to escape, and it took Willie's constant supervision to keep him from running off. He also refused to sleep on a bed, opting instead for the ground, as he had with the Apache and Comanche. He even found joy in donning his Comanche attire and amusing local children with war cries and stunts. Over time, his family's love helped him adapt to a normal life. Yet Herman never severed his ties with the Comanche. When he was 17, 2 years before reuniting with his family, he'd been formally adopted into Quanah Parker's family. That bond remained strong for the rest of his life. He continued visiting the Parker family and was regarded as a member of the Comanche tribe, even receiving tribal benefits until his death. In the end, though he rejoined his white family, he never truly left his Comanche family behind. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll check out our other stories. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future videos, feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you.